Thank you, Bishop. And the Bishop and staff asked me to just tell my story a little bit because I grew up on the other side of this equation about reaching people in the neighborhood as someone who was outside the church. And so I want to begin by showing you a couple of pictures that portray where I come from. This is where I grew up. Now, as you know, I live in St. Paul, Minnesota these days. My wife's from San Diego. How did we end up where we are, especially this winter, where if you think it's cold here, you have no idea. School has been canceled 3 days so far this winter. That does not happen in Minnesota. We never cancel anything, no matter how much snow there is. But when the wind chill is 50 below, you can get frostbite if your skin is exposed within 5 minutes. They cancel school. That's the kind of winter we've been having. But this is where I grew up. And on Sunday mornings, I was doing what most people in Santa Cruz County, California are doing, which is one of the things in that picture, right? Surfing, beach volleyball. That's the beach I spent my summers on. As you can see from this picture, going to church is a very odd thing. Now, of course, these statistics are what people report about themselves. This isn't who actually shows up in church on a Sunday. You notice that the number for mainline Protestant is equal to the number for other, which is how the sociologists classify other world religions, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Great majority are what they politely refer to as the unclaimed. What some sociologists refer to as the nones, N-O-N-E-S, that is. And I think the word nun is a little bit misleading because many of the people I grew up with did believe in God in some sort of way, and had some sense of spirituality, maybe the proverbial spiritual but not religious variety. So I was growing up in a story that I think is increasingly common in our culture today, particularly among young people, in a world in which institutions that once formed identity and meaning and purpose and belonging are disintegrating before our eyes. And the story I was living in goes something like this. Life is a story that you have to author yourself. You have to make it up as you go, because very little is inherited. And your worth, your sense of value, is based upon what you earn or achieve, what you accomplish. You have to strive for it and cobble it together. And rather than growing up within the structures and patterns of inherited meaning and community and belonging, you have to create all those things yourself, just from whatever materials are at hand. The sociologist Robert Withnow calls this tinkering, right? You just got stuff you need to put together, including community, because community is an increasingly fragile and fluid reality for people in today's world. Now, living in that story, I was on a trajectory of trying to work very hard to succeed and do whatever it took. And if I made mistakes or if others did, there really wasn't a whole lot of grounds for forgiveness. Now, it would never have occurred to me that church could be an answer to my search for meaning, identity, belonging, and purpose. And as I mentioned earlier, there were churches in the town I grew up in, and they were kind of just odd, irrelevant buildings. I mean, I knew there were people who must have gone to them, but what they did inside was absolutely a mystery to me. And I think I had been to church a couple times when I'd done like a sleepover at a friend's house, and I got dragged to some church, and I just was like, what are they, what is all this stuff? This is very strange. So, church was not somewhere I was seeking. Church had to come to me. And I'm grateful that God reached me where I was. I want to say a little bit about this. I had a friend in high school who was embodying the gospel, living values of forgiveness, reconciliation, grace, in ways that caught my attention and called into question the story that I was living in, which was about striving and earning and judgment and, pretty cynical kind of story. Now, she didn't go to church. I mean, Santa Cruz, California, nobody goes to church. And yet, the fact that she lived a way of life, the way of Jesus, as I would say now, in relationship with me and other friends, was compelling to me. Now, in my high school AP English class, I was assigned 2 books to read, Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. And I had to read these 2 books, kind of your classic AP English books, back to back. And there's an odd thing about those 2 books, because the characters in those books face a turning point about different paths they might take. And as I read through those books, I was struck that there was a Bible verse that appeared in both texts as those characters were making their choice about which path to choose. And of course, the path they chose was the Christian path. And that text is from John 11:25, where Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And I heard those words, and they stirred something in me. I didn't know quite what they meant, but I knew somehow that Jesus' question to Martha, "Do you believe this? Do you believe this?" was a question that I was beginning to answer yes. So I started praying. Now, it would never occur to me, even at that point, that I needed to join a church, because in the culture I grew up in, and the predominant culture now, I think, in American society, spirituality is a private thing. So I started to pray. It's a good start, though. And then I figured, I should probably get a Bible, right? So I went to a Christian bookstore. Good place to look for a Bible, right? They ought to have Bibles there. So I walk in, and there's this wall of Bibles with this alphabet soup of translations, completely baffling to me. So I said, well, now, I've heard of the King James Version, so I'll try that one. So I brought home my King James Bible, and I did what anyone does, right, with the book. Start from the beginning, read to the end. So I got somewhere into, maybe the later parts of Exodus, but definitely by Leviticus, I was done. But, the good news is that it was a Words of Christ in Red King James Bible. Anyone have one of those? Right, Words of Christ in Red. So I figured, okay, I'll turn to the back, and I'll read the red bits, right? And it started to make a little more sense. So, it happened to be my senior year of high school. I still wasn't, going to any kind of church, because I didn't know what church to go to. I knew there were all these churches, and, growing up, I'd ask my parents at some point, maybe it was about 10 or 11, so Mom and Dad were like, what are we religiously? What are we? And they just said, we're Protestant. We're Protestant. So, okay, I knew probably would try a Roman Catholic church, because that was, not really part of the family story, but Protestant, okay, but what does that mean, right? So I got to my freshman college dorm, and pretty soon, within the first couple of weeks I was there, I heard a knock on the door. And there were some Christians who were going up and down the hallway, knocking on the door and saying, are you interested in talking about spiritual things, about God? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Love to talk about God. So I invited this guy in, and we started talking about God. And we had a great conversation. And he came back and, started to get connected. And he started teaching me the Bible, and he didn't assume I knew anything about the Bible, which was really great. So he was like, let's start with the Psalms. Let's just read Psalm 1. Psalm 1, very simple. what do you think? What's going on here? Great conversations. Now, do you think he was Episcopalian? Going door to door? No. No, I wish he was Episcopalian, because he was actually from Campus Crusade for Christ. And it took me about 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months, before I was spending most of my time kind of arguing theology with him and with some other leaders in that group, because it wasn't obviously a good fit for me theologically. But to this day, I'm grateful that they cared enough to come to me where I was, and not to assume that I knew anything, and to connect me in the Christian community, to teach me how to pray, teach me how to begin to read the Bible. I mean, there are verses I memorized in my short little window with them that are still in my blood, right? And that seems like an old-fashioned thing to do, like have people actually memorize Bible verses. I mean, how many of us do that in our Episcopal churches? No, very few. Some of you, good. But there's something about that, right? Something really powerful. So Campus Crusade wasn't a good fit, and I kind of got launched on a journey of trying to sort my way through faith communities until I eventually settled in the Episcopal Church. And here's what I found in the Episcopal Church, which hooked me and has kept me there. If the story I was growing up in was that you had to make it all up on your own, entering into a tradition of common prayer, reflecting the wisdom of generations, was such a relief. You don't have to make it all up on your own. Faithful people have prayed these words before you. They've been tested through life circumstances. And you're entering into a community that claims the breadth of Christian tradition. Not just one particular confessional moment, say in the 16th century or something like that, but the breadth, and seeks to be Catholic in the full sense of that word, embracing a variety of voices, that tolerates paradox and mystery, that embraces reason, that has a sacramental understanding of human life. And I think perhaps most powerfully, even though I couldn't have put words on it then, a sense of the incarnation at the heart of things. That God actually shows up with us where we are, in the ordinary messiness of life, and invites us on a path of transformation that involves the healing of all of creation. Not just escaping from this world to heaven, but the restoration of the world. And so, the Episcopal Church was for me a place to come home. Now, I tell this story because I know that so many people like me, growing up like me, people that I was friends with, people in my own family, my sister, for instance, have never had a chance. I mean, now my sister knows what I do, and we have conversations all the time, but a lot of people that I grew up with, and a lot of people in our neighborhoods, don't know the gifts, the treasures that we are actually holding and stewarding. And I would hate for those treasures to die with us. Now, I'm confident that God is going to bring forth new expressions of Christian community in today's world. That's what the Holy Spirit does. But I believe that we've been given particular gifts to contribute that resonate deeply with the questions people are asking. If we could only translate some of those gifts in ways that would make sense to where they are. And that's going to mean going to where people are, listening to their stories, not making assumptions. I'm sure there were really nice Episcopalians in the town I grew up in. I mean, actually, I was once telling this story at a clergy retreat, and the retired rector of the Episcopal Church in Santa Cruz was in the audience. And it's not his fault, right? I mean, he was, I'm sure, consumed with trying to just, take care of the folks who were there and keep church going. And yet, how do we be free? How do we claim these gifts that we have and risk ourselves in freedom in reaching out to where people are? Again, as I said earlier, it's simple but not easy. But let's not take what we have for granted. I could never take the gospel for granted. It changed my life. I was on a path of despair. I was on a path of cynicism, loneliness, and I found community far different from any other kind of community that would have been available to me in my world. And every Sunday, I'm at a table, a public table, unlike so many tables in our society, where all sorts and types of people are gathered around God's generosity and grace and forgiveness. And I'm living in a story that trusts that ultimate reality is that banquet, but much bigger. Every tribe and nation, all sorts and types of people, all languages, brought together, feasting with God. And that, my friends, is good news. Thank you.